Okay. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? I don't know where you are, but wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is. I'm here. I'm Jim Harrison. I have no other choice, but I like it. So today, I'm going to talk about something that I've been slightly, I don't want to say obsessed, but I'm just fascinated by this topic. I've been writing a book, and throughout the olfactory part of the book and throughout, well, kind of the whole thing, this topic is through everything. Well, I mentioned the book, everything I'm writing, but it's everything in our life. And the topic is it's about placebo. Placebo is really not the right word, but it's the one we're familiar with, so it's the one I'm using. Placebo. Some people have a negative association with placebo. I'm going to change that. It's not my goal, but I'm going to change that. So let me get rid of a couple things here, and I will get started. It's my email address, by the way. As I take it off, that's my email address. Poof, disappeared. But yeah, I am doing resorts and retreats and essential oil experiences. This has been a thing that I'm focused on these days. And if you want to book me, that was it. Support@jimharrison.com. That's one way to get in touch with me. jimharrison.com is my website. It's another way to look and see what I'm up to. And you can get on my calendar, book it, an event, whatever you want to do. Hey, I'm here. I'm here. That's pretty much what it's all about. So anyway, this is what we're doing today. And I want to talk about the art of placebo. And the reason I'm calling it an art is because what I'm going to talk about is that it's well beyond placebo. I already said it's not the word placebo. We have a way of thinking about it. We have a perception when we say placebo. You see it on, or not so much on, but in a lot of studies, especially for pharmaceuticals. They'll do placebo and they will do the other thing, which is the real thing, whatever pharmaceutical they're testing. But they always do a placebo study. And what placebo generally refers to is the thing that wasn't the thing. In aromatherapy, we cannot dismiss what has been called placebo. There's a lot of emphasis on evidence-based studies, evidence-based essential oil, evidence-based aromatherapy. It's like, well, we proved that it worked. And when I go through the studies, I find that let me move up a little bit. When I go through the studies, I find there's something missing. And it's not the placebo as we think of placebo, but it is a placebo. When we do evidence-based studies, what we try to do is we try to eliminate any interference, anything that also may affect the end result of what we're studying. So if we're studying a certain essential oil, then we want to know whether the properties, the chemistry, interaction with those things in the body are what we're finding the results with, right? So, we know a lot about a lot of different oils, certain the esters in the lavender, because I mentioned lavender. They've done studies, and they've shown that it releases neurotransmitters or does some other physiological response that produces a calming or stress relieving effect. And they do that, or they know that that compound, they either isolate it and do a test with that as well. Or they eliminated all of the other things that may affect that, which is, I think, impossible with essential oils. How do you eliminate odor? when you're testing an essential oil. I have some recent studies that I looked at. I think I talk about them a little bit here. And they do an odor, and then they do the placebo or the blind or the control, which is no aroma. And in double-blind studies, what it's all about when they say double-blind is they're talking about the practitioner, or in this case, the person doing the test, and the person receiving the test. So the test study, neither one of these people know what's in or what's being tested, which is called double blind. I don't think they can really do that with essential oils all that often, but that's kind of the idea, especially with pharmaceuticals, right? Double blind studies. We don't know, if I'm the guy doing the test, I don't know which bottle this test subject is receiving. So when I analyze the results, they're calling it double blind. It's a funny term, isn't it? Now, these are controls that they're trying to eliminate. So what I want to talk about today in the art of placebo is, instead of removing those controls, instead of removing the environment, instead of removing a lot of the things that they will try to eliminate from a test, I want to say that they belong within that study, because they're part of why, especially essential oils, they're part of why the essential oil works. And so we're calling it placebo because it's supposed to be not the thing, but it's producing the same result. It's having a placebo effect. I can't understand why that's a negative. If something's working, like if I have rose, very expensive oil, and I do a study with it, and I find that people who aren't really receiving rose are still responding the same way that the people are receiving rose, I could save a lot of money by not using rose and just saying, hey, this is rose and it's going to work and it's going to do all these magical things, and it does, and it works and it does all these magical things. And, I just saved a lot of money by not using real rose, right? I know that's kind of silly and it's not really the way it works. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is that the placebo effect is a good thing. If it's creating a therapeutic effect, a positive therapeutic effect, which I'm also going to talk about the other side of that, then cool. That's what we should be focused on. So it's a placebo. Yeah, it is. And it's working really well. That's why I wrote that slide there. Here's what the topic is all about, okay? I'm doing a thing here where I'm working with top down. Okay, so this is really important. Where did I get this information from? I actually want to explain that. Amir Zar, Z-A-R, wrote a book called The Suggestible Brain. Now, the information that's in that book is something that I have been using in my aromatherapy practice for ever and ever. And in my practice, I have found that there's a certain amount of what I say, what I present, how I present it, information that is what would be called suggestion, that actually is part of the therapy that I'm doing. And then I read the book, The Suggestible Brain, and it gave me the science to back up what I was finding was working in my practice. So if I say that this oil is stimulating, and then the result with my client is that they are stimulated, that's what I want, right? The goal was, stimulation or energy, however you want to phrase that. And the result for that goal was exactly what I was trying to do. That's good, right? Now, There is actually an essential oil study, excuse me. There is an essential oil study, and who even knows if it was essential oils, because I found this in an olfactory scientist book. And for the most part, back when this book was written, I think it was in the 90s, a lot of these olfactory scientists didn't think essential oils were any different than any other aroma. And in a way, that's correct. Essential oils are no different than any other aroma when we look at it from just olfaction, from the sense of smell, the science of smell. So in the study in this book, lavender or not, they took a group of people and they said, this oil is calming. And 100% skin conductivity, brainwave readings, everyone responded to the lavender as a calming oil. So they wanted to try a stimulating oil, brought a group of people in. This is a stimulating oil, 100% brainwave readings, skin conductivity. The people who were smelling the oil were stimulated, energized. Both oils in that study were lavender. Like I said, this is in the 90s when this book came out, when I read it. And that was part of what I was already using, assuming, and knew was a reality in my practice. That what I tell you is what is going to create a response. Now, that may sound a little extreme, a little more than what you would like to hear, maybe. But it's true. And there's a lot of science to back it up. What I want to tell you before I move further into this is that I'm not dismissing, like the olfactory scientists do, I'm not dismissing the chemical properties and the way that the body reacts with essential oil chemistry. I'm not dismissing that. That is a key part of what we're doing here. And I mean, I've spent 30 years teaching chemistry. You know, I taught it at Bastyr University, a medical university. And if I went in there saying, it's all in your head, right? It's placebo. I don't know if I would have been teaching there for 16 years. Probably not. There is really good scientific backup, that evidence-based thing I was talking about, for how essential oils work. It's not the only thing, though. In the suggestible brain, Amir Zar introduced to me, I don't know if it was his, but introduced to me top-down, bottom-up signaling. So when I talk about the chemistry, when I talk about the therapeutic properties of essential oils, what I'm talking about is a bottom-up activity. The things that we have learned about the chemistry, the physiology, that the essential oil compounds bind with receptors in the skin, receptors in the nasal passage, and then create a signaling. Physiology changes, the body changes, things happen, healing, everything we know about essential oils. That is bottom up. That's the more physical properties of the essential oils, bottom up. What is generally missing, and this is when I do a control, like when I was talking about the studies, what is generally taken out of the controls and what is generally missing from the way that we work with essential oils is the top-down influence. The top-down influence is, it's all in your head. It's what you think. It's what your brain is processing. And, you know, if you get into any of the, self-help, manifestation, affirmations, those kind of philosophies and teachings, it talks about how the brain, how your thoughts create your reality. I'm simplifying that, but yeah, creates your reality. And in the context of what I'm talking about, the reality is it creates a physiological response in your body. What you think creates a physiological response in your body. The lavender, when I say it's calming, creates a physiological response in your body. The lavender, when I tell you that it's a stimulant, it creates a physiological response in your body. This is top down. This is really important. This is what you want to use. This is what is key to the art of placebo. How do you work with this? This is what I'm going to talk about. So top down is expectation, suggestion, atmosphere, and previous experience. My world is in spa. This is where, I developed my chops in aromatherapy. I owned a hair salon, and it was all about atmosphere. It was all about mood. It was all about creating an emotion. Plus, you had to have some skills. If you're an esthetician, if you're a massage therapist, if you're a hairdresser, you have to have skills, right? Those skills actually become part of the top down. Your skill set and the client's perception of your skill set becomes part of the therapy. Marketing. That's what marketing is all about. You're selling your services. You're selling you. You're selling the atmosphere. You're selling the emotion of the work that you do. You're selling and creating a top-down signaling that is changing the physiology of the clients that you're working with. So in spa, this is extremely important because spas have atmosphere. We have the music. Now we're getting into sound therapy, which is a very cool thing. But as you walk into the spa, there's music and there's scent and there's the atmosphere, the architecture of the space itself. All of this is creating an emotion. All of this is creating a top-down signaling that is creating a physiological response in the body of the clients who are walking into that space. I'm going to talk a lot about expectation. Expectation is a key to the art of placebo. Now, I really should change the word from placebo because placebo has this definition that generally tends to be negative. And so instead of calling it placebo, let's just call it suggestion, because it really is suggestion is what we're doing. And so expectation creates a suggestion in the mind. If I read the pamphlet of a spa and I'm inspired and it just sounds like the place I need to go, through that pamphlet, it's creating in my brain an expectation or a suggestion of what the experience is going to be like. And even before entering that spa, just reading the pamphlet creates a physiological response. I'm not making this up, by the way. This is, The Suggestible Brain is a really good book for kind of overview of all this. But there's a lot of research out there, that evidence-based stuff that we like to talk about. It's out there talking about how top-down creates a physiological response. So instead of ignoring it, let's work with it. Good idea, right? So expectation changes pain. This is a study, what is this guy's name? Zubieta. And it's from a 2005 study in journal Neuroscience. And so the study basically was about changes in pain. So who volunteers for these? I don't know. That's why I was having that moment going, ooh, I hadn't thought about that. But in the study, they create a pain situation for the participants in the study. And what they found is that the brain participated in creating an analgesic response. So the control, well, actually, I should say that the therapy was the suggestion that whatever we're doing is relieving pain. This is why it's challenging with essential oils. Okay, so helichrysum relieves pain, peppermint relieves pain. If I was using helichrysum or peppermint in the study and I wanted to have a control where I was using a cream or whatever they were using without helichrysum or without peppermint, you're going to know it, right? because peppermint and helichrysum and whatever else you may be using for pain in aromatherapy has an aroma, hence the name aromatherapy. So I don't know how they try to do these controls, and it seems silly. I find a lot of the controls they do in essential oils are not realistic, and I'll talk about that because it's not real life. But this is a good thing to understand. The science that is showing us not so much how it works, a little bit about how it works, what neurotransmitters are released, the analgesic neurotransmitters that we have, that we release in our body to reduce pain. This is what was released when in the study, just through a suggestion of pain relief. So when there's an expectation of relief, you create the expectation either through a cream with the scent of peppermint, helichrysum, whatever, or you have the placebo, which would be the unscented cream. And I don't know what the presentation was there. I can't remember how the study did that. But here's this magical cream that has these incredible compounds in it. Now, you don't really smell anything because they're not an aromatherapy compound, but they will get rid of your pain. And the cream really has nothing in it. And a lot of times, in these studies, it's accurately nothing in it is pretty accurate, because if I were using carrier oils that we use in aromatherapy, these have therapeutic properties. So we don't know if the therapeutic properties in the rosehip seed oil, blackberry seed oil, the coconut oil, the olive oil, we don't know if those are participating in the analgesic effect, right? So if those are in the cream that are supposed to be the control, then the control just was not a control anymore. Now, the reason I said it could be accurate in these studies is because a lot of times they're using all these synthetic creams that are just loaded with nothing but emulsifiers and water. And emulsifiers are the synthetic ones generally come from petrochemicals. And even if they don't, if it's a coconut oil derived emulsifier, I always tell you there's no natural emulsifiers. They're all synthetic because they go through a process of changing the chemistry of what it was when it was taken from the plant. And if there's any therapeutic properties in that oil before it turns into an emulsifier, through the emulsification process, it probably limits any therapeutic properties, except for moisturizing. You can get some moisturizing properties from those, but that's not what the study is. This is a pain relief study. So you create an expectation, and they found that, there was pain relief, right? Participants experienced less pain. The endogenous system, that's what I talked about, neurotransmitters, things like that. The pain response system in the human body responded even without anything that was supposed to be the pain relieving property or compound. So that's expectation. It does have some science behind it. This is my favorite area to talk about, your words. Also a very important part of manifestation, affirmations, your meditation. A lot of these self-help philosophies talk about your internal dialogue. Your internal dialogue is what creates your external reality. That is a statement that is true, but not, you can call it somewhat of an exaggeration, but not enough of an exaggeration to ignore that it actually has a lot of truth to it. So the words change the response. We've seen this in several different studies. There's the very commonly talked about Rachel Herr's study, where I can never remember the compound, but she took this one compound, put it in a bottle, and had these participants smell it. And on the label, it said Parmesan cheese. And, everyone responded like, hey, that's Italian. That's especially me, my Bostonian Italian family. Parmesan cheese, it's good memories. So, yeah, I would have responded in that same way. Another group of people got the same exact compound, but it was labeled as vomit. And it was disgusting, and it made you want to vomit, which is exactly the response you would expect from something that smells like vomit. The words, it's not spoken words, but words on a label. This is about marketing and labeling too, when you consider this. The words on the label tell you what the expectation is going to be. When I mentioned the lavender study, it's a stimulant, it's a sedating oil. The words are what changed the expectation. The words are what changed the result, the physical result of that study, of that response. So this is another study that came out in 2013. And in this study, they also used lavender. Lavender gets used in a lot of studies. And I didn't dive deep enough into it to see if this study was using a well-documented lavender. A lot of times they will put the GC in there to go, look, we use lavender that's supposed to be real lavender according to the GC. But in this context, it just doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So using lavender, and this was also to reduce pain. So the words were lavender will reduce your pain. So again, they cause pain in whatever way they cause pain to the participants. There was, through the language, through the way it was presented, lavender will reduce the pain. The expectation of relief was now in the brain a top-down influence. The results were less pain, even without the odor. This is one of those studies where they did a lavender and they did an odorless thing. And how do you do double blind there? Because if I'm smelling lavender, I know I have lavender. If I'm not smelling anything, I know I don't have anything in there. But it still caused the pain relief. The expected pain relief was still there. Words are powerful. I'm going to talk more about that too. But let's talk more about pain. Or actually, let's talk about nocebo, which is the opposite of placebo. So if placebo is a generally positive effect, meaning that we're looking for a therapeutic result, and even without whatever we were trying to prove as a therapeutic result, it still had the therapeutic result, meaning it had a placebo effect. Now, in some ways, or in some situations, there is a nocebo, meaning a negative effect. As aromatherapists, we run into this, I don't want to say fairly often, but often enough, where, if there's a rash, right? So I use, I'm going to use helichrysum example again, because helichrysum is such a great oil for reducing inflammation, and a rash is inflammation. Now, what if I put helichrysum on a person's skin to reduce the rash, and it actually increased the itchiness and increased the redness and increased the inflammation? Oops. That would be generally your response if you put helichrysum on somebody and created a negative response like that. I've actually never had that happen, but it makes for a good example. And, we find that to happen. People have negative response sometimes to essential oils. Now, what I hear too often that absolutely is not true is that, the oil, like if people tell you, well, I had a negative response to lavender, the response has been, and this is not anything in my book, but, it must have been a synthetic, or it must have been a bad oil, it must have been adulterated, it must have been this, it must have been that. No, it was whatever it was, and they had a bad response to lavender. Now, if you're going to try and use lavender on somebody like that because you think your oil is better than the one they worked with, which could be true or could be not true, the expectation's already in their head. So you're not going to try. Well, you can if you want to. Your words could change that. So I shouldn't really say that. I got to be careful what my words are here, right? But there is the nocebo effect is a negative reaction to something, even if the something isn't there. So if I use an odorless cream and I convince the person that it's lavender and they have an allergy and in their head, they have an expectation that they're going to have an allergic reaction, you could produce an allergic reaction on somebody without any of the lavender in that cream. Now, again, I'm kind of taking this to extremes, but we see this in very, very subtle ways, often in ways just obvious enough to make us question what's going on. If you understand this expectation, this suggestion, this top-down way of thinking, you're going to understand a lot more of sometimes the negative, sometimes the unexpected positive effects of your work in essential oils, and actually any therapy. Essential oils, especially because through the olfactory system is much more elusive. It's and much more unpredictable. That's why essential oils are much more fun to play with in this kind of suggestion top-down way of working. But really, any therapy, this is relevant to. So in the nocebo effect, if there's a negative expectation, it's going to be a possible negative response. And this is where you don't want to force something on somebody. If they don't like it, why? There's plenty of oils to choose from. You don't need to change them unless they want it changed. Then that's a process that you work with. But that's a different conversation we can have another time. Negative suggestion. If there were negative suggestions with somebody, like before they came to you as an aromatherapist or before whatever, acupuncture, or whatever you do, and all they heard was negative responses from people who said they experienced the same thing, but it caused a rash or it caused irritation or it didn't work or whatever, negative response. It's in the brain. It's going to be a top-down influence. It's going to be a nocebo effect. So the increased symptoms, that would be in pain, right? And this is actually a study where they wanted to increase pain. So they, it's like the vomit study, right? Same thing. You can increase negativity through your words, through suggestions, through the way that you're presenting. Mostly suggestion. Everything is about suggestion here, okay? So the negative nocebo effect, that's another study there from neuroscience in 2006, Benedetti's. This is the key to what I'm talking about here. Don't let this be random. Understand that all of this is going on. Top-down influence is always happening. You cannot erase it. They try to erase it in evidence-based studies, in blind, double-blind studies, in control studies. Remove as much of the environment as you possibly can in these controlled environments. Makes no sense. You're only going to get that little bit of information. Like I said earlier, I started thinking about this well before I read The Suggestible Brain and got some language to present it and found the science to back it up. I read and have read many studies. And according to the studies, and this was some cancer research I was doing, in those studies, I should be able to cure every cancer there is. Essential oils cure cancer. Now, based on the studies and based on real life, the finish for that is I would have to take the tumors out of the body, put them in a petri dish, and then put the oil in there, or inject the essential oil directly into the tumors. The studies for cancer are not real life situations. Real life is much more complex. Where I learned this extensively and directly is I was commissioned by a naturopath to suggest formulas, for cancer. He was doing these treatments in an IV. That was pretty cool to be able to be an observer in that situation. Now, what I found from working with the studies, creating, the formulas and seeing the results is it worked sometimes and it wasn't effective most of the time. And, just to kind of give you an idea, where it did work was mostly soft tissue, breast cancer, and liver cancer. I think he had 2 patients where it successfully diminished the cancer cells, but, there was brain tumor. And that was actually with the person who had the liver and breast cancer, which were eliminated, but then eventually she ended up with a brain tumor. And 5 or 6 different patients. And I had studies that said, yes, it should work. In the studies, it was successful, therapeutically successful. But again, either animal studies where they're injecting it directly into the tumors or in petri dishes. And that's not real life. Real life is much more complex. Human body is more complex. The essential oils are more complex. And so that is the extreme of looking at double-blind evidence-based studies and how they fit into real life studies and how all that works. But the evidence-based is you can find what's missing by looking at these studies and then saying, what did they take out? What did they try to eliminate? And instead of in your practice leaving those factors out, put those back in, because it's going to help you understand the situation in a much clearer way, which is going to help you select the right essential oils and the right application for whatever you're treating. And again, any therapy, right? So don't let this be random. Understand what the expectations are. This is part of your intake, is you want to know what this person knows about the therapy that you're working with. What do they know about essential oils? Where do they learn it from? Is it social media influencers? Always good information there. And the expectations can be kind of weird, but you can work with those expectations. You're not trying to go, oh, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. You got to eliminate that expectation. We're going to put something new in there. It's not necessary. Work with whatever you have to work with, because everything can be done in a way where it becomes part of your therapy. So the verbal cues, this is when I talk about words, verbal cues. There's actually studies in olfactory science where, the lavender study does that. It's a sedating one. It's a stimulating one. Verbal cues, right? And actually all of these things where, lavender will reduce your pain. It's a verbal cue. I have a different way of working with verbal cues, not making it so direct. I'll talk about that in a minute. Previous experiences. They had an allergic reaction to an essential oil. You need to know that. You need to understand what that was. Where did it come from? How does it affect how you're going to work? You need to incorporate that previous experience in as a positive influence in the way that you're going to work. And then environments and atmosphere. So key. And we know that, right? If you have a treatment room, you try to set up your treatment room that responds emotionally, or actually I should say creates an emotional response that is healing. The room feels therapeutic. When you walk into a spa, which again is a good example, the spa setup should feel healing. I mean, it should feel like whatever they're trying to express, right? And, every spa is different. Every atmosphere is different. It's just what you want to create as an expectation is what you're doing when you create the atmosphere. And that includes scent, music, or sound, whatever you're doing. I've said this a lot. create the expectation. So again, don't let it be random. Create the expectation. And the expectation begins before the treatment. So it's not, you're not doing all this at treatment time, okay? So advanced information, right? So your marketing, when I talk about that, the pamphlet or the PDF online, and your client is reading through it, that information should be creating an expectation. And you want to create an expectation in a way that is emotionally a connection. This is marketing. I mean, this is everything about marketing is about creating the emotion, right? This is why packaging, which is basically atmosphere and environment, things like that, it creates the emotion, it creates the idea. Perfume advertising, I think, is one of the best examples of emotional marketing, because a perfume is just a perfume. This is olfactory science, which is very challenging because everyone has different expectation. Everyone has different olfactory response. Everyone has, memory, emotional bonding with certain fragrances. Everyone has an idea. Everyone has preferences. All of these things go into the sense of smell, which is what the challenge and the benefit is of working with essential oils. So in perfume, if you watch these ads, they're not really telling you what it smells like. Oh, it's a citrusy with a vanilla base. They might do that sometimes, but that's almost irrelevant. What they're doing is they're creating a feeling, an emotion. Who are you going to be when you put this perfume on? What are you expressing to anybody in your smell environment when you're wearing that perfume? It's creating an emotion. It's creating an expectation. So your marketing, which has a lot to do with your language, whatever kind of promotion you do, it's part of the experience that you're going to create when the person is actually in the room with you getting the treatment. And, right here, anticipation of desired response, right? And that's what you're doing. The anticipation is the emotion. And you're creating that emotion for what the person wants to do. They're not going to come to you if, you're not selling them on what they want, right? So if they're coming to you, they're already have an expectation that you are going to deliver the experience that they want, the desire that they want. So this is prior experiences. I mentioned this already. Prior experiences are actually part of what that expectation is going to be. And you need to incorporate their prior experiences into what you're going to deliver. And you don't want to do this in a negative way. Everything you want to express should be harmonious and positive. So even if they come in with previous, negative previous experiences, you don't want to go, oh, well, they must have done this wrong or that wrong. It's like, no. That's not really what you're trying to do. What you want to do is you want to bring that person in a more positive way. You don't want to, having any kind of negativity within your system isn't really going to be a good thing. It's not going to help the placebo or the expectation. In fact, it can diminish a little bit of the expectation. So social media, other sources, these are all the things that help you get to where you're going. Words are your therapy. I guess I've said that about 100 times in this presentation. I like to use language that creates the response. Now, I've said a lot of phrases already that work into this. Lavender, reduce your pain. Lavender is sedating. Lavender is stimulating. Whatever. That isn't really the way I like to approach language. I like to create more emotion behind it. So let's say I have a client who becomes easily stressed at work. And in my clinic, in my room, working with the client, what I'm doing is I'm creating a relaxed experience, right? I want to give the person what they want to feel when they're actually outside of the room. Now, I go through a lot of steps. I have a lot of systems that I've developed, a lot based around expectation, how to create positive expectation. And so the list of things that I want to talk about with the client are, what environments do they enjoy the most? Let's say a client comes in and she's just talked about her Hawaii vacation and, the exotic warmth of the beach and, all the things that are Hawaii are where she feels the best. She can easily relax. The odors are just, those florals that are in the air. It's the experience, that euphoric experience that is emotionally bonded. It is a strong emotional bond to help her relax. So along with everything else that I'm talking about, I may want to bring Hawaii into the therapy. Now, the way I would do that is I would use, florals that would be found in Hawaii. The leis that they put around your neck, tuberose, great oil, very euphoric, very exotic, very Hawaii. Jasmine, tuberose, these very rich, sweet, luscious florals. And then maybe vanilla. It's not like vanilla is in Hawaii, but vanilla works as a kind of exotic, I'm on a beach fragrance. Maybe coconut. But where I'm going with this, right? So now I create a roll-on for the person. And in my therapy, I actually work behavior modification and a few other things, create emotional memory bond with the fragrance that we worked with. And when they take that and have it with them in their environment, and they're stressed out at work, the language, the words that I've communicated with them isn't that, oh, this will calm you down when things get rough. Nah. What I tell them is, this is you laying on the beach. When you apply this, just smell it and remember and feel what it's like to be in Hawaii and feel the release of all that tension. Feel Hawaii. So I'm not saying this will calm you down. This will make you feel relaxed. This is blah, 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 blah. That's all positive. That's all good. But it doesn't have the same impact as you're on the beach in Hawaii when you put that on. So this is the kind of language that I like to use. If somebody has a lot of muscle tension, it's going to release your muscle tension. Feels good. Yeah, that's positive. Those words will work. But what I want to express is, what does that feel like? Feel the release of your muscles. Feel how loose your shoulders just got when you put this on. I want to create the emotion. I want to create the feeling. So my language is positive, but it's positive on a more emotional level. It's positive on more, this is what it feels like to have your desired response. Your language is powerful. Your language is extremely powerful. Their language is powerful too, what's in their brain. And so these kind of phrases that you want to stick in somebody's brain are ones that they can relate to, ones that they can repeat without it being like an affirmation, even though creating an affirmation is good too. But the affirmation should be just a thought of, oh, this is what it feels like to be on the beach in Hawaii. This is what it feels like when my muscles just melt instead of tensing up from all the pressure that I'm under. Atmosphere is important too. So you're creating a sensory experience. Like I mentioned, spa, 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 spa. One of the best examples, but everywhere. One of the places I like to go to is, I can't remember the name. When I'd be walking around New York City, I used to live in New York. And, I lived in Boston, and I worked in New York when I was in Boston. And, when I was getting tired or something, I'd go into, one of the big cathedrals there and just sit and meditate. And the atmosphere is just so phenomenal. The ambient resonant of the sounds, somebody sitting in one of the pews and it goes kick, click, click, and it doesn't sound like that because the ambient sound creates this echo and this reverb and this just beautiful feeling of being in that environment. And it was extremely relaxing. It was regenerative. And so the atmosphere is so important in what you're creating as a sensory experience. Don't let it be random, right? You're creating an atmosphere. You're creating the experience. What do you want your therapy to feel like? What do you want the end result of your therapy to be? It should feel like that in the atmosphere. The treatment begins before the treatment begins. So when your client walks into whatever space the entryway is, they should feel the therapy already starting. And all the studies that I listed and all the studies that I know about and Suggestible Brain book by Amir Zar, it all talks about the physiology of the body is reacting. So this isn't just all in your head, this is in your body. So the healing has begun, right? The physical healing has begun. So the aroma, the touch, and the touch is mostly in the therapy, but when people put their hands anywhere, on the counter when they're talking to the receptionist, anything like that, everything should respond in the appropriate way, which is, what is your therapeutic result? It should feel like that from the atmosphere, the sensory experience of walking into your space. So the sound, the light, environment and atmosphere, really architecture is the word I should use there. I said this already. Treatment begins before the treatment begins. And this is a powerful piece about understanding about what your work is. And so I've used placebo as an entryway into this, but it's about suggestion and creating the experience before the experience of the hands-on treatment, before the experience of bringing the essential oils out, before anything else starts. Your treatment has already begun. So what you're doing is let the placebo become part of the therapy. Suggestion is part of the therapy. Go for the ride. Do it. Let it go. So, that's it. That's what I have for today. And when you start using this, you're going to find it's powerful, it's potent, it works. There's therapy in placebo therapy. And that's why I started referring to this as a therapy. Placebo is part of your therapy. So again, don't let it be random. Suggestion, expectation, environment, atmosphere, everything is part of your therapeutic practice. It doesn't matter what you do. Like I said, essential oils. This is why what I'm doing now, I think I've done everything. I co-founded a skincare company, plant-based skincare company. So I was in manufacturing. I was in producing skincare in retail. So having to do things so that people were responding without me being there. And it was all through the marketing and through the texture and things like that about the experience of the skincare. We were in Whole Foods in these big markets. So I had to understand how it worked there. And like I said, I taught it at a medical university. And that was really cool because it was actually a mix of, I wasn't in the academic program. And so there were the academics, the doctors and naturopaths and acupuncturists and all the other therapists mixed in with lay people. I had accountants in my room. And I had to be able to teach so that what I was teaching wouldn't, be boring and the same old for the medical people, but not too far over the heads of the non-scientific people. It gave me a skill set that helped me with my language, helped me with the way I presented, helped me with the way I created expectation. And like I said, I owned a hair salon. I was a hairdresser. That's how I got into this. I started as a hairdresser. And, I created atmosphere and I created, all of these things. And when I started working with essential oils, I was working one-on-one with clients because it's amazing what people will tell their hairdresser. So what a great way to develop a therapeutic practice. I'm not asking them questions, it's conversation. And I learned a lot. And so when I started developing essential oil formulas for people in my hair salon, it was just cool because of the information that I got from them. So I really have done almost everything. I've been an educator and wrote books and everything else. And so I like this next step that I'm taking is to do retreats and resorts so that I can bring this information. And, if you own a spa, if you own a salon, if you own a resort, anything like that, it's retreats. You have to be able to do these kind of high-end retreat things for this to work, but I create these really cool experiences because everything I just said about essential oils are part of creating an experience. So I'm not coming in there and doing essential oils going, these are going to make you feel good. And this is going to, it's not my deal. I create an experience. So I do skincare experiences. I have one called storytelling with essential oils, which is really cool. And I'm going to tell you about this. I'm going to Morocco again, coming up real soon. If you want to go to Morocco, send me an email at jim@jimharrison.com. I gave you the support at jimharrison.com earlier, but jim@jimharrison.com works too. And Morocco, we went to Morocco and it was supposed to be an aromatherapy trip. And the people who designed the trip were just a tour group, and they forgot to put the aromatherapy in the aromatherapy trip. I was supposed to be scheduled twice a day to do workshops. They didn't schedule me at all. So for the participants, it was extremely frustrating. So the first workshop I did, and it was after dinner, after a day of traveling, it was storytelling with essential oils. Now, storytelling is any story you come up with. So the story was about the trip. It was frustrating. It was disappointing. There were all these elements. And so what I did was I took that story and I turned that into a symptom. So what was our goal? Our goal was to heal frustration, to heal disappointment. And we went through a whole storytelling process about what that is, and then came up with the chemical properties of the essential oils that would fit how to resolve that goal. So we came up, here's a symptom. Here are the properties we need to resolve that symptom. Here are the chemistry and the properties of the oils that, selecting oils. And then I created a formula. And it was really cool because I was able to use all Moroccan oils that I had with me. And I turned this negative experience into a positive. So instead of going, oh, yeah, this really is awful, I created the story around how we resolve it. And so throughout the rest of the trip, because that was on the first day, and this was a 10-day trip of missing out on anything that had to do with essential oils. Now, the one coming up, I helped design everything essential oil. It's all essential oils. It's going to be amazing. But Morocco was amazing anyway. It was a beautiful trip just to experience Morocco. So because we started out creating the positive thought process and experience, I was doing talks on the bus. We were in a cavern and we had a few minutes and we said, hey, let's go, I can do another presentation. And I was sitting on a rock in a cavern doing a presentation. So it really turned into a really cool trip because we took the negatives and we turned them into positives. And so in the retreats that I do, because that was actually a retreat experience, when I design the retreat, instead of someone else tour group doing it, it becomes something that, not just do this, which is a lot of, you go for yoga, you go for, meditation, stuff like that. You need to carry all that stuff home. Because essential oils have a scent emotion bond and we create formulas in these retreats and experiences, you take that home. And so you can recreate, just like I said about, here's you sitting on the beach in Hawaii. Here's the blend that we created in this retreat, like we did with the Moroccan. All the people in the retreat took the Moroccan blend home. So they were able to re-experience the positive, right? If you own a spa resort, or want to do these retreats, and you want people to think about that experience from your location, from your property, taking that blend home represents you. It doesn't only represent me. It represents you and the property and the experience that you created. So the guests go home with you in their pocket and can take you out anytime they want to have that experience again. So this is what I love creating these things, because it just takes everything I've ever learned over the last 30 plus years of working with essential oils, and it turns it into a beautiful experience working with essential oils. So give me a call, give me an email, send me a message, send me a comment anytime. I'm on YouTube and right here on LinkedIn, and I'll be back again. So thanks so much, and I'll see you on my next live stream.